I didn't think a patch of grass could turn me into the kind of person who plans something quiet, deliberate, and just a little bit vindictive, but that's exactly what happened. It started small, the way most problems do, just a couple of cars cutting across my lawn like it didn't belong to anyone, like it was just empty space between where they were and where they wanted to be. And for a while, I let it go, because you tell yourself it's not worth the trouble, right? You tell yourself people will stop once they realize someone actually lives there. But they didn't stop. They got comfortable. My name's Daniel Mercer, and the house I'm talking about sits on the corner of Alder and Ninth in a town called Brookhollow. One of those quiet suburban places where people wave even if they don't know you, where lawns matter more than they probably should, and where everyone secretly keeps score about who's keeping things nice. When I bought that house, it wasn't the biggest on the block, not even close, but it had this wide stretch of green wrapping around the corner, soft grass that caught the morning light just right, and I remember thinking, yeah, this is it. This feels like something I can take care of. For the first few months, it was exactly that. Peaceful. Predictable. The kind of place where mornings are slow and coffee actually tastes better because there's nothing rushing you out the door. And then one Tuesday, nothing special about the day, just another weekday morning, I noticed tire marks on the grass near the curb. Not deep, just enough to bend the blades in a way that didn't bounce back. I stood there a second longer than I needed to, mug in hand, staring at it like it might explain itself. Probably just someone turning too wide. I muttered, more to convince myself than anything else. It didn't feel like a big deal. The next morning, though, there were two sets of marks. Slightly deeper this time. Same curve. Same entry point off the road. Same exit angle back toward the intersection. That's when something in the back of my mind started connecting dots I didn't want to connect. By the end of that week, it wasn't random anymore. It was a pattern. Every morning, right around 8:10, just as traffic started building up on Alder where the light always took a little too long, one car would peel off the road, cut across my lawn in a smooth arc, and slip back on a Ninth ahead of everyone else waiting. And once one person did it, others followed. Not immediately, not all at once, but enough that you could see the idea spreading, like someone had quietly redrawn the map and everyone agreed to pretend it had always been that way. I remember standing by the window one morning, watching it happen in real time. A gray sedan rolled up, paused just enough to check for oncoming traffic, then dipped off the asphalt and onto my grass like it was nothing. The suspension dipped slightly as the wheels hit softer ground, and then it just glided across, leaving a faint trail behind. No hesitation, no guilt, just efficiency. Unbelievable, I said under my breath. That afternoon, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Carl Henderson, who was out front trimming his hedges like he always did, precise, methodical, the kind of guy who measures things twice even when nobody's watching. Hey Carl, you ever notice people cutting across my yard in the mornings? I asked, trying to keep it casual. He didn't even look surprised. Oh yeah, he said, snipping another branch clean off. Seen it a few times. Folks hate that light. A few times. I let out a short laugh. It's turning into a daily thing. Carl finally glanced over, gave me that half shrug people give when they've already accepted something you're still trying to fight. People do what they can get away with, Dan. You know that. That line stuck with me more than I expected. People do what they can get away with. At first, I tried to brush it off, told myself it was just a phase, maybe a temporary shortcut people would get bored of. But the grass doesn't lie. Within a couple of weeks, the area where they were driving started to flatten out completely. The soft green gave way to something thinner, weaker, until patches of dirt began showing through like scars. It wasn't just about the lawn anymore. It was the feeling that came with it, like a boundary had been erased without anyone asking. One morning, I stepped outside just as a black SUV was about to make the turn. I raised my hand, not aggressively, just enough to signal, hey, maybe don't. The driver, a guy probably in his late 30s, leaned out his window slightly, eyebrow raised. What? This is private property, I said, trying to keep my voice even. You can't just drive across it. He looked at the ground, then back at me, like he was evaluating whether I was serious or just another inconvenience. Then he smirked, actually smirked, and said, "Relax, man, it's just grass," before easing forward anyway, rolling right past me like I wasn't even there. I stood there, watching his taillights disappear into traffic, and felt something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly, something quieter, colder. That night, I walked the edge of the lawn slowly, following the now visible path they'd carved into it. It curved in a perfect arc, almost elegant if you ignored what it meant. I crouched down, ran my hand over the dirt where grass used to be, and thought about Carl's words again. People do what they can get away with. And for the first time, I started wondering, what would happen if they couldn't get away with it anymore? I didn't act on that thought right away, not because I didn't want to, but because part of me was still trying to be the reasonable guy, the one who handles things the right way, whatever that even means when you're dealing with people who've already decided your boundaries don't matter. So I started with the usual fixes, the kind you'd expect, the kind that make you feel like you've at least tried before things get creative. That weekend, I picked up a set of decorative stones from a garden center just outside town. Nothing too flashy, just heavy enough that you'd think twice before driving over them, and I lined them along the curve where the tires usually cut through. Took me a couple hours, back aching by the end of it, but when I stepped back and looked at it, it felt solid, intentional, like I was reclaiming something. Monday morning, I woke up a little earlier than usual, coffee in hand, standing by the window like I was waiting for a show to start. 8:07, 8:09, and then right on schedule, here comes that same gray sedan. It slowed down just enough to register the change, and for a split second I thought, okay, maybe this works. Then the driver nudged forward, one wheel at a time, pushing the stones aside like they were nothing more than loose gravel, and rolled straight across the lawn, leaving the rocks scattered behind him like an afterthought. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. By Wednesday, half the stones were either shoved into the dirt or tossed toward the sidewalk, like they'd been politely removed from the road everyone had silently agreed belonged there. So I escalated just a little. Next came wooden stakes. Not flimsy ones either. These were solid, about 2 feet high, spaced evenly along the path. I hammered them in deep, made sure they were visible enough that no one could claim they didn't see them. Tuesday morning, I watched as a pickup truck approached, slowed down, and then, instead of stopping, the driver angled slightly, clipped one of the stakes, snapped it clean in half, and kept going like it was just part of the terrain. I felt my jaw tighten. That afternoon, I replaced the broken ones, drove them deeper this time, harder, like somehow putting more force into it would translate into more respect. It didn't. Within days, they were either bent, broken, or just gone entirely. That's when I tried the sign. Simple, direct, impossible to misunderstand, private property. Please stay off grass. I stood there for a while after putting it up, reading it like I was seeing it for the first time, hoping the clarity of it would do something the stones and stakes couldn't. It didn't. People didn't slow down to read it, didn't pause to consider it. They just drove right past it, or over it, like words only matter if there's something backing them up. And that was the moment it really clicked. It was never about awareness. They knew exactly what they were doing. They just didn't believe anything would happen. A few days later, I ran into Carl again. Same spot. Same hedge trimmers humming away like background noise to the whole neighborhood. "You look like you're losing a war," he said, not unkindly, just observant. "Feels like it," I admitted. "I've tried everything short of building a fence, and even then I'm not sure that'd stop them." Carl nodded slowly, then turned off the trimmer, giving me his full attention. "Fences tell people where the line is," he said. "But they also tell people exactly what they need to get around." I frowned. "So what? Just let them keep doing it." He shook his head. "No. You make it so the line doesn't need to be seen." I stared at him for a second. What does that even mean? He just gave a small smile, the kind that suggests he's said enough. You'll figure it out. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Make it so the line doesn't need to be seen. I went out to the yard after dark. No street noise, no cars, just the quiet hum of the neighborhood settling in. I walked that same worn path again, heel to toe, following the curve like I had a dozen times before, but this time I wasn't looking at what was there. I was thinking about what could be there. Not something obvious. Not something they could move, or break, or ignore. Something that would change the outcome the moment they tried. The next morning, I stood by the window again, counting. 1 car, 2, 3. By the time I hit 10 in under 30 minutes, I wasn't even surprised anymore. Just certain. This wasn't going to stop on its own. So that weekend, I got to work. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not Carl, not the other neighbors, not even the guy at the hardware store when I loaded up my truck with materials that probably didn't make much sense together unless you knew the plan behind them. I started early Saturday morning, just as the sun was coming up, the kind of quiet where even small sounds feel louder than they should. The first step was digging. Not a trench you'd notice, nothing dramatic, just a narrow line beneath the surface, following the exact curve those cars had carved over the past few weeks. It was almost eerie how precise it was, like I was tracing someone else's work. The soil was softer than I expected in some places, compacted in others, each section telling its own story about how often it had been driven over. I worked slowly, deliberately, making sure the depth was consistent, deep enough to hold what I needed, but shallow enough that it wouldn't be visible once everything was covered again. By midday, the trench was done. That's when I brought out the posts. Short, reinforced steel, nothing tall, nothing that would stick out or draw attention. Each one was cut to a height that would sit just below the surface once installed, anchored deep enough to resist pressure, spaced close enough that there wouldn't be a gap wide enough for a tire to slip through cleanly. I set them one by one, pressing each into place, checking alignment, making adjustments where needed. It was methodical, almost calming, in a way I didn't expect. There's something about building a solution with your hands that quiets the noise in your head. By late afternoon, everything was in place. I stood there for a moment, looking down at what was essentially invisible already, and felt a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. Then came the part that made it disappear. I filled the trench back in carefully, packing the soil down just enough to keep everything stable without leaving any obvious signs of disturbance. After that, I rolled out fresh sod, piece by piece, aligning it with the existing grass so it blended seamlessly. By the time I was done, you couldn't tell anything had been touched. It looked exactly the way it had before all of this started, maybe even better. That night, I sat on the porch longer than usual, just looking at the lawn, replaying the plan in my head, wondering if it would actually work the way I thought it would. Not to damage anything, that was never the point. Just to introduce resistance. Enough to make someone pause. Enough to make them think. Monday morning came faster than I expected. 8:08. 8:09. And then, like clockwork, the first car appeared. Same gray sedan. Same approach. Same confidence. I leaned slightly closer to the window, not even realizing I was holding my breath as the front wheels dipped off the pavement and onto the grass, following that familiar arc. And then, it stopped. Not abruptly, not violently, just stopped. Like the ground had quietly decided it wasn't going to cooperate anymore. The driver hesitated. You could see it in the slight tilt of the car, the pause that stretched just a second longer than it should have. Then slowly, almost cautiously, the car rolled back, returned to the road, and merged into traffic like nothing had happened. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Okay, I whispered. Okay. But I knew one car didn't mean anything yet. The real test was what came next. The second car came less than a minute later, a white crossover this time, a little more cautious on the approach, like the driver had just seen something not quite right, but couldn't explain it. It slowed near the edge of the pavement, hesitated, just barely, then eased forward anyway, committing to the same shortcut that had worked every other day before. And just like the first one, it stopped. No loud noise, no crunch, no visible obstacle. Just that same quiet resistance, like the ground itself had decided, not today. The driver leaned forward over the wheel. You could almost feel the confusion through the glass. They tried inching ahead, just a little, testing it, like maybe it was soft soil or a rut they could power through, but the car didn't budge the way they expected. Not stuck, just unwilling. After a couple seconds, they backed up, pulled back onto the road, and merged into the line like everyone else. That's when I knew it wasn't a fluke. By the third car, something had already started to shift. A dark blue sedan rolled up, slowed earlier than the others had, stopped right at the edge of the pavement, like the driver was replaying what they'd just seen the two cars before them do. They crept forward, just enough for the front tires to touch the grass, then paused. And then they backed off. Didn't even try. I couldn't help it. I smiled. Not a big, triumphant grin, nothing dramatic. Just a quiet, satisfied kind of smile, the kind that comes when something finally clicks into place after weeks of frustration. Over the next few days, I kept watching. Not obsessively. Okay, maybe a little obsessively, but it was hard not to. Every morning felt like checking the results of an experiment you'd carefully set up, wondering if human behavior would really change that easily. And it did. At first, people still approached the corner with that same old instinct, drifting slightly toward the edge like muscle memory was trying to take over. But then they'd slow down. You could see it, that tiny moment of doubt, the hesitation that hadn't been there before. Some would roll forward just a few inches, testing the boundary without fully crossing it. Others didn't even bother. Within 3 days, the shortcut was gone. Just like that. No announcements. No arguments. No confrontations in the street. The pattern that had taken weeks to form unraveled in less than half that time, quietly, almost politely, like it had never really belonged there in the first place. The line of traffic at the light grew longer again, back to what it had always been, cars idling, drivers waiting their turn, following the rules they'd been so quick to ignore when there was an easier option. And my lawn started to heal. At first, it was subtle. The dirt patches softened as the new sod settled in, the edges blending together until the scar that had once cut across the grass became harder to trace. Then the color came back, that deep, even green spreading across the surface like nothing had ever disturbed it. A couple weeks later, you wouldn't have known there had ever been a path there at all. One evening, I was out front watering the yard when Carl wandered over, hands in his pockets, that same measured look on his face like he'd been watching everything unfold from a distance. "Well," he said, nodding toward the corner. "Looks like the traffic found its way back to the road." "Looks that way," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, even though there was a part of me that wanted to explain the whole thing in detail. He studied the grass for a moment, then glanced at me. "You didn't put up a fence?" "Nope. No new signs. Didn't need to." Carl let out a small chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "So what did you do?" I paused, letting the question hang there just long enough. "I didn't block the path," I said finally. "I just made it so the ground stopped agreeing with them." He looked at me for a second longer, like he was deciding whether to ask more, then just nodded once. "Huh." And that was it. No follow-up. No need for details. Because deep down, I think he already understood. People don't change because you ask them to. They change when the cost of what they're doing finally outweighs the convenience. A few days after that, I had one more encounter. I was out grabbing the mail when a guy pulled up along the curb. Same black SUV from before, the one who'd looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's just grass." He rolled down his window again, this time without the smirk. "Hey," he called out. "What did you do to the yard?" I shrugged slightly. "Nothing you can see." He glanced toward the corner, then back at me. Car just wouldn't go. Thought something was wrong with it. Car's probably fine, I said. He narrowed his eyes a little, like he was trying to piece it together, then gave a short, almost reluctant nod. Huh. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just different from the last time we'd talked. Then he said, "Guess I'll just wait at the light like everyone else." "Probably a good idea," I replied. He pulled away without another word. And as I stood there watching him merge into traffic the normal way, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not even a little. Because it was never really about the grass. It was about the line. The invisible one people step over when they think no one's going to stop them, and how quickly they step back when something finally does. Now, every once in a while, someone new will slow down at that corner, drift just slightly toward the edge like they're considering it, and then think better of it. And every time, I notice that same small moment, the hesitation, the choice. That's the part that sticks with me. Not what I built, but what it changed. So here's the question I keep coming back to, and I'm curious what you think. Was that the right way to handle it? No signs, no warnings, no confrontation at the end. Just a consequence they couldn't ignore. Some people might say it's clever. Others might say it's passive-aggressive, maybe even unfair. Because I never actually told them what was there. I just let them find out. So if you were in my place, would you have done the same thing? Or would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments. Because honestly, I still go back and forth on it sometimes, and I'd like to hear where you land.